Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm very happy today to have with me Mike Tuñez, correct?
Yes,
Tuñez.
That's correct. Thanks a lot for having me.
A co-owner of Firelock Games and principal designer of Blood Plunder and
Buccaneering, that's right, yeah.
Buccaneering. Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for coming.
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I don't know if you've had a look at, had some previous interviews with other members of, of our wargaming community. Mm-hmm. I usually start the question a bit, typical that how you started in wargaming, how it became your principal business, how you took the step of, with becoming your main source of income. I can imagine your basic, your most important, and something I would ask you because you are obviously from the young generations coming up now to take over, from this Rick Priestley's and Warhammer design teams. Were you influenced by these guys? Were you, do you know their work? Was it an important, let's say, influence to you to start wargaming?
Certainly, yeah, definitely. Not so much to start, but more later in my wargaming life. So the thing that got me started on wargaming, my first wargaming that I continue to play to this day is BattleTech. So BattleTech was my introduction into wargaming in general when I was very young. I think I was 12 or 13 years old, something like that. I was in middle school, I know that. And then from there, I pretty much played that exclusively until I was an adult. And when I became an adult, when I first got married, I started playing a bunch of different games, just trying out different things. Started out mostly in sci-fi, different sci-fi games like 1843 and stuff like that. Then eventually branched out into different types of historical wargaming. I think my first historical war game was Flames of War. Flames of War was my introduction into it. And then from there, I kind of just started picking up. I realized with historical wargame, you could just buy a rule book and just have figures that work across different things. And I just started trying out tons of different systems. And from there, I definitely, like you mentioned, Rick Priestley. I think one of the games that actually kind of led me into the direction of historical wargaming was, ironically, Lord of the Rings, which I know was his design, I'm pretty sure. And there was some Warhammer historical games that were based off of that rule set. So some of those games kind of led me to where I'm at with things. This is in particular Legends of the High Seas, which was their kind of like Hollywood pirate sort of game. And when they went under, I felt the need to create a replacement for that game because that was among my favorites. Because pirates and colonial battles and such have always been something that has interested me from a young age. So that led me to where I'm at today. So just to get to where that ends up. When I started designing that game just kind of for fun, just to create. I wasn't super happy with some of the things in that game, in particular the sailing rules. As somebody who actually sails, I live down here in South Florida. I sail in the Florida Keys all the time, so I'm very familiar with sailing and the way sailboats work and stuff like that. And so that the sailing didn't quite do it for me in that game. So I started developing my own game. Ended up sharing it with a local gaming friend who happens to be a pretty savvy businessman. His name's Alex Aguilar. He's the co-owner or co-founder of Alienware, the computer company. Okay. So he has been retired at this point, and he just really fell in love with the game and just came and said, "Hey, why don't we make this? Why don't we start a company and do this?" And at the time, I was between jobs and I started going back to school, and I was like, it just happened. It all kind of happened at the right time, and we sat down and started a company and published the game, did a Kickstarter, and 4 Kickstarters later, here we are.
Yes. Was it? I mean, you said it's something that came up naturally, but was it a difficult step, a frightening step? It's a bit of it's not it's not something common or easy because you're not opening a engineering company or you're not opening a lawyer. It's very out of the mainstream. Was it frightening for you to give resources, of course, and I know it's something you love, but was it a bit frightening when you did, especially this period where it's difficult times all over the world?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was frightening, particularly because at the time I had just been laid off from a job. And this was around the time of this is toward the end of the recession that was happening here in the States. And so I had just been laid off from a job that I actually hated quite a bit. So I took advantage of that and started going back to college to finish my bachelor's degree. And then, so I wasn't really doing a lot. I was just doing that. And I was just kind of working. I was doing some part-time work just to make up the difference between, my wife, thankfully, is a nurse and makes very decent money. So she supported me in that, going back to school, doing something more interesting. And since it happened in the middle of that, I figured, it doesn't really hurt to take a chance for me right now. It's actually really good time. So, I mean, worst case scenario, I waste a year or so of my life. That's at the end of the day, it's not a whole lot for something that could potentially be, life changing, which it was. So thankfully, it worked out well.
Yeah, for sure.
But I could definitely see that being had I not been in that position, I think I probably still would have done it. But it definitely would have been scary at that point, because if you had to leave the job I had before, even if I didn't like it, it was I had a decent income and it was not bad, and me and my wife were very comfortable. So to take a risk on that would have been a little more intimidating, I think.
Yeah, I understand. Tell me something about Firelock Games. I mean, I'm here in uncharted waters. I'm wargaming many years, but I'm a historical wargamer. But if you've checked the channel a bit, but I have maybe the most boring channel on the planet. I only play 100 Years War, big battles, this kind of skirmish games or pirate games or all these games that I'm not very familiar with. It would be a great opportunity for me also to learn about these games. I mean, for a Pirates period that I love, I have to say, most things I know it's maybe from the Pirates of Caribbean. So that's I'm gonna get so. I was checking Blood Plunder, and I was checking other games you have. If you can give us a description of the games, what you're looking, what you're aiming, where you're focusing. You're into skirmish games mostly. You're planning of expanding in bigger games with more miniatures. I have the feeling that most of these games are like skirmish games, correct? Or they look very beautiful, but I'm saying, give me just an idea of the company and where you want to take it from here. Sure. And for the games, we'll discuss more detail for the Blood Plunder, because I read quite a lot of reviews, so I have an opinion.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So Blood Plunder was our first game, and so to me to play, when I initially started working on Blood Plunder, I actually had designed it as a individual model, really small skirmish, like 5-10 models aside kind of thing. I realized that didn't really fit, because when I started out with the game, I didn't know the history very well, right? So my imagination and what I saw, my basic understanding was Pirates of the Caribbean as well, right? So movies and fiction and stuff like that was dictated my idea of what should be done. But then as I started I wanted the game to be historical and I wanted it to be accurate. So I started doing a ton of research and reading a ton of books. And of course, I have to shout out Benderson Little, who was the catalyst that took Blood Plunder the direction I ended up going, because he has a book called The Sea Rover's Practice, which if you're a historical wargamer and you're interested in the actual practice and tactics and the minutiae detail of how pirates, buccaneers, and privateers would engage in their trade, there's no better book. I mean, it just blows everything away. There's no book that's written like it. But anyway, so that book really opened up the world for me of how those combats took place. So I realized that really it was either going to turn into a mass battle game or a larger skirmish game to really make it work, right? But I felt like because a lot of people would have the same initial impressions as me, I think a skirmish game made more sense. And there are certainly plenty of actions that involve 20 to like 100 miniatures aside, which is pretty much what Blood and Plunder entails in the game. So it fit the setting pretty well, especially the naval aspect. One of the big goals for that game when we put it out was to make a game that, and I felt this is what was lacking in the majority of games that tried to cover this setting, make a game that truly covered the land warfare aspect as well as the naval aspect and everything in between that, right? So ships seamlessly integrate into the game. You could, if we showed up to a game store to play a game and you have a ship and a crew and all set up, and I have a pure land force of militia or something, let's say, right? We could play against each other, no problem. So the ship interacts with the game normally. You guys could come off the ship, they could stay on the ship, fire cannons ashore, that kind of thing. So really, really happy with how that turned out. So that's one of the things that really makes Blood and Plunder unique, among many other things, such as we have a pretty unique activation system and a few other things that make the game, we have I think we have quite a lot of flavor for a historical game, just because of the diversity that you're able to find in the Americas as it's, growing into what it's going to become. And you have that mix of the Native Americans, the various European powers coming and interacting with each other. The Africans are brought over, everything else like that. So it's a really, really rich, diverse setting and environment with a ton of flavor and just tons of options. And that's, and it works well. We also have rules now to play at a larger scale. I wouldn't quite call it a mass battle game at that point, but it is definitely, at that point, it scales up to like 100. You're going to want to play between 100 and like 300 models a side, more or less.
It's big.
It's basically a really big skirmish. You activate essentially companies at a time as opposed to like units and squads. But it does work well, especially with the ships. That's the biggest way people play that a lot. Is they'll have we've gone like at a Historicon and stuff like that. We've put together pretty large battles, small battles in naval context, but for our context, very large battles with using 28 millimeter ships. Having like 10 ships on the table is pretty massive. So and they're tons of fun. So some of the other games like Oak and Iron is kind of the evolution of Blood and Plunder, and that one could be thought of a little bit more as a mass battle game, although it still plays in a skirmishy sort of way since you don't have a lot of models on the table. But that's an all naval game, and it's set in the late 17th, early 18th century. So the very early part of the Age of Fighting sail, right? I mean, obviously they're fighting in sailing ships before, but what I mean by that is where they develop the tactics that would go forward for the rest of the fighting sail period, like line of battle and focusing primarily on broadsides instead of boarding and stuff like that. So, and then that game, it plays. You can play that game very small, 3-4 ships aside. You could also play it bigger, 25, 30 ships aside, and it scales into all that stuff. And that game had I really wanted to make a historical game that could appeal to non-historical wargamers or non-wargamers in general, like more board game sort of oriented players. So that's a game that comes pre-packaged with miniatures that don't require any glue to assemble. You just pop the masts into the hole. You don't even need to paint if you don't want to. The holes are brown, the sails are white. So it's got some basic color on it. The box comes with a C mat. It comes with all the cards, all the dice, the rulers, the rule book, terrain, everything you need to play is in the box. So for a $69 box, you have a full game, right? And then there's obviously expansions that you can add. So we wanted to make a game that was really accessible to people. One of the things that's really important to us as a company is to do that very thing, right? Is to engage people who are not necessarily interested in historical wargaming, maybe, or people who are not interested in wargaming in general, and just give them games that are engaging, exciting, and more along the lines of what they expect. Something like what a Warhammer player might look for in a historical game, without compromising the historical integrity or accuracy of the game. And then the final war game that we have is our last game to come out, which was Blood and Valor, which is essentially a rework of the Blood and Plunder rules, to handle small unit skirmish actions in the First World War. And that one came out in February of this year, late February this year, and it's been doing great. And we've got working on expansion for that now, and it works very similar to Blood and Plunder, minus the ship part, obviously, but the mechanics are very similar, slightly different initiative system, but more or less it falls right in line with that.
Very interesting. So you are very Navy orientated. You like Navy games, obviously. You like ships, and it's something that it's missing from wargaming for sure. There are not many games. Let's talk a bit about the mechanics of Blood and Plunder. I mean, I've seen a couple of YouTube videos, and I saw you have some really beautiful cards that they're activation cards, depending on the factions you have, and run through around this how it works and what factions you have. You have English, you have pirates. Because as I said, I'm not familiar. It would be very interesting for me to know the choices somebody has. Are you expanding these choices slowly, bringing more and more stuff in this game?
Right, yeah. I just realized I forgot to answer the last part of your question, which I'll do real quick, which is where we're taking the game, where we see ourselves going. So we have
don't be quick. Don't be quick, because go as long as you want, because it's very interesting for people to hear what is happening.
Right. So we have a lot of plans to publish a lot of games. One of the things that we have, like Blood and Valor, is the first in a series of games where it's designed by people who are kind of within our community of gamers already, but not necessarily, a staff of Firelock. But they have ideas for games, and they have really good ideas for games, typically based off of or influenced by some of the mechanics we've already put together. So we have people who are interested in doing games like Napoleonic skirmish, or a mass battle, Renaissance, or kind of pike and shot period sort of battles. Some fantasy things, some science fiction, things like that are just kind of in that realm. So people have come to us with those ideas, and we don't see why we wouldn't. So we're going to roll with it, basically, if they put together a cool game. 100 Years War skirmish is another thing we're actually looking at. Yeah, so then there's a few things along those lines. But there's a few games like that have been submitted to us, and we're working with the designers, and they're giving us, they're bringing they're bringing their ideas to us. We're looking at it, going back and forth with them. So these are things that we will release as, unlike Blood and Plunder, not really full game systems, but rather just historical rule books that you could just play with your existing model collection or use other model collections first. Because for a lot of things like 100 Years War, for example, there's a ton of great miniature options out there. I don't see a reason to jump in and start competing in that market. So, but I do enjoy the period, right? I think it's really interesting. Very colorful, very fascinating history. So there's not a ton of options for skirmish games for it. So there's definitely room for that.
Well, this is a very good idea. Sorry to interrupt you regarding the 100 Years War, because I could say I'm very familiar.
That's your thing.
Yeah, it's my thing. It's a good idea because currently 100 Years War is quite popular, and the skirmish, let's say, department has only Lion Rampant. That is basically covering all this skirmish period. So it would be great to have another option for people who play skirmish games. So basically, you're saying to me that all these projects you have for the future are basically rule sets that people will buy, and then they can utilize miniatures from different manufacturers and whatever they want. But regarding Pike and Plunder, the miniatures are yours. This is Blood and Plunder, the miniatures are yours. This I want to ask you also.
Yeah, these are. We have a full line of miniatures, terrain, ships, accessories like dice, cards, custom tokens, things like that. So for that game, that game and Oak and Iron are fully supported by us. We do everything. We do all the miniatures, all the peripherals, like everything you need to play. We have available in some form or another. So there was a previous question that I skipped over to answer the other question.
That's okay. Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. So I think your previous question was I already forgot. What was
The
the
game,
question?
how it works. I mean, I've seen some really
right.
beautiful cards, the mechanics, the philosophy behind the game. It's a bit interesting, but from the interviews I did before with the other guys, I saw many comments where people were interested in the brain of the designer, how it works, how you go about the mechanics, how the game works, and card system. Now it's quite popular in many rules that people like cards, and I like cards in my games. They give an unpredictability, and also if the artwork is nice, they make the trend better. So just give me an idea of the game and anything you would like to say about it.
Got it. Okay, that's right. I remember now. So Blood and Plunder was, so first of all, like I said, I had played Legends of the High Seas, which is a cool game. It's based off the Lord of the Rings skirmish system. They added some cool ideas into that. And I thought that was a fun, interesting game. But, it got axed, didn't exist anymore. So now, as far as I knew, there wasn't really any historical miniatures games that dealt with that kind of 28 millimeter skirmish scale stuff, right? That had to do with ships and pirates and colonial stuff and things of that nature. So when we got started on it, I immediately wanted to address the things that I thought could be improved from that. So again, the first thing I addressed was sailing. When I should preface all this to say that for me, Blood and Plunder was my first war game. So I looked for what I liked in games and started to base it off that. So I started just taking ideas from different systems that I liked, put it together. Those things ended up kind of evolving into their own ideas that are just ended up being completely different. But the thing I look for always is I don't like, obviously, excessive complication for no reason. I like a little bit of crunchiness to a game, like a little bit of character to things, so that everything is not too simplistic and everything is just the same. That could lead to a good game sometimes, but replayability will suffer, right? Because once everything just happens the same way, you start to build patterns, and if you're playing similar opponents all the time, which lots of us are, it's just always going to be the same thing after a certain point. So you need to throw in, you need to have some depth without being too simplistic, but also the game should always be tactical. And that's the tactics should be caused by friction, right? Like you should be faced with hard choices on every aspect. So that's something that's baked into the system of Blood and Plunder. So when you have Blood and Plunder, the part of the key components of Blood and Plunder is the combination of two things. Aside from obviously the cool draw to it is the amphibious nature of the conflict. But as far as the rules themselves, there's two key components I think that make the game really interesting. The first one is the activation system. The activation system is cards, as you talked about, and you can use a regular deck of like poker cards, 54 card deck with the jokers in it, and that'll work. We make custom ones that have all the game information printed on it, and they're nice looking, like you say. They kind of fit in with the theme and the period. Yes. It's all inspired by period artwork and stuff like that, and period cards as well. So the way the mechanic works is you'll draw one card from your deck, and each player has a deck, and you'll draw one card from your deck for every unit you have on the table. To start a turn or start an activation, each activation for each unit, each player will place a card face down of their choice from their hand, right? You'll flip the cards over, and then whoever has the higher suited card, in the suit order goes spades, hearts, diamonds, and clubs, right, in that order. So if you play a spade and I play a club, right, you're going to go first. You're going to pick one unit and go first. Now, the downside to that is every unit has an experience level, inexperienced, trained, or veteran, right? And based on that, the card will tell you how many actions you get. Now, a trained unit, let's say, right, middle of the road, average unit, a spade will give that unit one action, whereas a club will give that unit 3 actions. So now you're facing that choice of, do I want to take these 3 actions? Because there's a lot of things you can do. Actions include moving, shooting, reloading, rallying, all the things you're going to do in the game, right? So do I want to do 3 actions? Do I really, really want to push it? Or do I want to go first? Because going first is obviously a big advantage. But you're very limited. So you have to be really prepared to be able to go first in a lot of situations, right? So now that's the dynamic. And obviously the in-between cards like hearts, you get 2 actions. So on average, unit's going to get 2 actions. But if you really want to push it to go first, you'll get 1, 3 if you're going to go later in the turn. Now, and the what adds to that dynamic is the other, I think, crucial part of the game, which is the fatigue system. So you can your unit can gain fatigue in various ways, and fatigue just represents like suppression, casualties, actual physical tiredness, different things like that. And it's just kind of an abstract idea that just basically represents the friction of battle on your troops. So with the fatigue system, anytime that you are shot at, or I should say hit with an attack, you have to take, based on how many casualties you've taken. If you take no casualties, just 1 dice, and then you add 1 per casualty on a unit. And you roll a test on the unit's resolve. Any die that fails gives you a point of fatigue. You can also take fatigue by doing things like giving yourself an extra action. So you play a spade, but you really need 2 actions. You could give your unit a fatigue to get 2 actions instead. You can also use fatigue for things like defensive attacks and things like that. So if you get charged, you can fatigue yourself to act out a turn to shoot at the unit that's charging you. If you have loaded weapons, or if you have bayonets or pikes or anything like that you can defend yourself with. So you could take kind of a preemptive attack. So those are, fatigue is kind of the currency of your units to get them to do things and act. So if you if you're going first, you're getting the opportunity to put fatigue on your opponent, or to maneuver out of the way before they can put fatigue on you, or vice versa. And not to mention casualties, of course, as you guys can still get knocked out of combat. And then the whole system is based on D10s, right? And then there's a range mechanic where every 4 inches of range makes it 1 harder to hit. We're talking about black powder weapons here, so obviously there's not a lot of accuracy. So being right up against somebody is the best way to get an attack off. So that ends up leading to a very mobile, very tactical, very active game where stuff is constantly happening. And then each time you play a card, you're going to each activate a unit. So you're going to go with 1, I'm going to go with 1, and then we're going to play a card, and you could activate potentially 2 times in a row, but no more than that. There's also the commanders. Commanders can influence the battle by spending command points, and command points just let them give an action to any unit within their command range. And typically a commander will have 1 to 3 command points. And so you could actually kind of do maneuvers with your commanders. So when they activate, now you can take, let's say you could do, so in the case of regular troops, right? They can now do a platoon fire. So they can all fire together in one just massive volley, which can be pretty devastating if you time it right and set it up correctly. So that's kind of the dynamics of the game. And then to just input the ship rules real quick, because that's always a question.
Yes,
that's how that integrates. Yeah. So the way we actually we had all kinds of systems that just ended up feeling like 2 different games that never really worked. And we finally, the way we cracked the code on ships is we basically said, aren't ships just buildings that move around? They're structures, right, at the end of the day. So we basically we turned ships into, essentially, ships follow the same rules as a building, as a fortress, as any sort of structure with rooms and sections, and we treat the different sections of the ships as essentially different rooms in a house, right? Of course, the difference is ships can move. So you add some rules for movement on ships, and that's it. That's really the only extra part of the game that adds to. And a ship is technically 2 structures. You have the hull and the rigging. We treat each one as separate structures. And then you can target each one. Artillery, again, affects ships, buildings, fortresses, affects it all the same. We tried to keep, since as I mentioned earlier, I do a lot of sailing. So from a practical standpoint, I always try to approach everything from a practical standpoint as well. So in a lot of naval games, naval gamers tend to really like a lot of minutia that doesn't end up being super relevant really to the kind of stuff that happens in war games. For example, in a naval game, you typically I've never played a naval game that doesn't have that. Well, they either super abstracted and just ignore the wind completely for the most part, or they make it so there's always a whole bunch of points of sail, and you're going to go faster at some, slower at others, which makes sense. That's a real thing, right? But practically speaking, in a combat situation while you're sailing, you're not really focused on that too much. You're not trying to get certain points to pull ahead. I know that happens a lot in the fiction, but in real life, it's not really a factor. That's more of a kind of thing you're thinking about for a sort of a long, when you're moving a very far distance, because the difference of a knot or 2 in a battle isn't going to be huge. we abstracted down to the important aspects of it, of what's important in a sailing battle. So you cannot sail against the wind. We make it 45 degrees only because that's an easy angle to tell on the table, and it doesn't restrict the play area too much, because when you're talking about 20 millimeter ships, obviously it takes a lot of room on the table. So so 45 degrees is a good compromise. It's really easy to tell when you're at within 45 degrees of the wind or not. And it gives you a little more maneuver room. And it still reflects the reality that ships could not sail directly into the wind, right? I basically, if there's a naval game where ships can sail into the wind, I'm not interested. Now, unless sometimes it's well done, but I was thinking of one game, I forgot the name of it. They did it okay. You got to kind of roll. It represents tacking. It's abstract. I get it. But anyway, so when you're you have three positions in Blood Plunder. You can't sail against the wind. That's in irons. Then there's windward, which essentially just means that your bow is closer to the table edge the wind comes from than your stern is. And if you're sailing windward, then you get a speed penalty based on the type of ship you have, right? And each ship will have a different penalty. And then there's sailing large, which is basically just the wind is either a beam or a stern. And the only place there'd be a real difference there is if you're sailing dead downwind, but we just kind of wave that away for the sake of simplicity. It would slow you down, but it's not substantial enough to really, I think, to throw it into the game and just make it complicated for no reason, because those are kind of finicky angles to tell. You can make it 45, but then that's way too big for sailing for a dead run. You really got to be on like straight downwind for that to really make a big impact on your ship. So, but yeah, that's pretty much Blood and Plunder in a nutshell, I think.
From what you said, I can see you have many strategic options in the game. You start first, you have the initiative, or better wait and do 3 actions. It's very interesting. What about the factions? What factions do you have in the game? Are you planning of adding more? Just give me an idea. I'm interested to know.
Sure. So we have a lot of factions in the game. So we break the way armies break down, right, is we have 2 categories. So the first category is nation, so nationality, which is a loose term for the big overarching powers, right? So you have France, England, Spain, you have the Dutch, and then you've got the Native Americans, which is not really a nationality, but it makes up a large conglomeration of what that represents. And then you've got the peripheral powers and the unaligned, which represent basically nations that had nations or other groups that just had small footholds in the Caribbean or North America or South America, or just rogue groups like the Brethren of the Coast or the Maroon communities and things like that. So, but all told, as of now, as of everything that's in print, the game has, I believe, 67 factions, because within each nationality is several different factions. So you have, let's say, Spain, right? So within Spain, you've got several factions within there. You've got the Spanish militia. You've got the Spanish, the Armada de Barlovento, which was their navy in the New World. Then you've got the actual Spanish tercios, the armies that are present, the regulars that are present in the New World. You've got the corsarios, which are the privateers that come from Europe to basically hunt pirates in the New World, and interlopers, and the becoming pirates themselves, very similar to the guardacostas, which is another faction. That's the local Spanish coast guards, essentially. And all these factions, even though they're all Spanish, will all play differently. They'll all have their own little twist, and each faction has a core unit selection, and oh my god, how can I forget the name? A core and a support. Thank you. A core and a support section. So you could have one support unit for every two core units. So army building is simple, and then there's a point system for all the stuff, and you can get better commanders and all that stuff. So
compulsory units and
exactly. So correct. And then there's a ton of and then there's options within each unit, and then each faction sometimes has sub options, right? Like, so you could have like Spanish militias, for example, could have armadillas, which are basically localized militias sent out and forming kind of makeshift navies to do things, and stuff like that. You have then you have lots of commander choices. We have a lot of names, historical commanders, whatever we can find good sources for them and things like that. So
I want to ask you this. Yeah, you have names. You have commanders with names and characteristics.
Right, and typically the main characteristics. Well, we have 2 categories of commander. I'm sorry, 3. We have the generic commanders, which is just, you have inexperienced, it's just, untested, I always forget the name of this, untested, experienced, and seasoned. Those are the, yeah. So those are, and each one has, it's basically, they go from, very short command distance, 1 command point, up to 2 command points with a couple special rules, things like that. Then we have historical commanders, which are basically just a play on those. So we get the generic commanders and we add a few special rules based on whatever we can pull from history, from things that they were involved in, and assign them to certain factions. Then you have legendary commanders, which are really famous people that are documented very well, and they each have their own. They each even have their own faction lists based on the things they did, and they'll often add special rules to their factions, and they have obviously typically very good command ranges and command points and special rules and things like that. So, and it's all representative of it's all the kind of thing you'd find in like a fantasy or sci-fi game. But we pull all of these things from history because, and the truth is always stranger than fiction, right? So there's always plenty of interesting things you could get that you could just based on the characteristics of the way they executed an attack or something they left behind in their written memoirs or whatever. So there's a lot of really good stuff to pull from.
But I realize now that you're explaining the game, it's very historical, very historical. It's very accurate also regarding the period.
Yeah, we even, we work with, like I said, Benderson Little, who's the author I mentioned. We actually ended up hiring him as a consultant. So we worked with historical consultants to make sure that we kind of stay, on track. And obviously, it's a game first, right? So we want the first and foremost, we want it to be fun. So realistically, like one of the things that's not historical about it, for example, is that there's like the body count, if you will, in Blood and Plunder is much higher than it would have been in real life. Which you could wave away and say, oh, they're not necessarily dead; they're running. They've just flowed. They're running away because you in some of these battles you'd have like 300 people fighting each other, and you'd have like 4 guys that are actually casualties. So, but so some like that wouldn't be fun if you were playing a giant game and nobody does anything. So we have to make certain concessions. But in general, yes, the tactics, the way the factions play, a lot of the details, those things are all historical.
How something is important for gamers? How big does a table require to be to enjoy a game of Blood and Plunder? I mean, okay, you can play with 3 miniatures, but I'm saying in order to enjoy it and get all the aspects of the game and enjoy every single bit, what do you think a good table would be, and how many miniatures to enjoy the game properly to get the feel of the game?
Yeah. So on average. For miniatures size, so the amount of models for like a standard game. So what we call a standard game, about 200 points, and that's going to be that's going to vary by faction and how elite or not, or like really crappy militia. You could take like 50, 60 models into a 200-point games, whereas really elite like Buccaneer units or regular troops or anything like that, you're going to have closer to maybe 25, 30, something like that, right? And then so model sizes you can say between 25 and 50 based on the faction you're playing. As far as table size, and then typically 1 ship per faction if you want to play ships is good. You could do 2 smaller ships, or sometimes you could even go with a mosquito fleet of like longboats and piraguas and things like that. But table size, that's something that I thought a lot about. So we abstracted scale, I think, pretty well. I'm not super hung up on ground scale. Like I think a lot of older school designers, I think, get really caught up in that. And I've seen that, which is, I can understand why you kind of want to represent the space to get everything. But Miami, I live in Miami, Florida. It's a very expensive city. I've never had a lot of gaming space. So I can't set up a 4x8 table in my house. Like, it's not going to fit. So I don't have those kinds of luxuries. So I designed with that in mind. So a game of Blood and Plunder, if you're going to play a land battle, we typically play between 3x3 foot table and 3x4 foot table. And we don't really ever play bigger than that. If we play a really big army scale game, sometimes we'll do a 6x3. Which we put in the rulebook, I think 6x4, but with the popularity of Star Wars Legion, which does 6x3, there's been a lot of mats that have come out in that size, and we got our hands on one, and we realized it actually plays much better on that size for bigger battles. But so we'll be updating that in the future. But anyway, for a naval game, if you're doing smaller ships, we've actually played it on 3x3 water mat. One of the things we put into the naval rules to keep so that you're not boxed in too much is the idea of an endless sea. So since there's not a lot of terrain on a typical naval battle table, right? You may have a couple shoals, maybe an island, right? What we do is we make rules so that the sea is endless. So if you sail off the table, you just kind of slide everything back about a foot or so, and then you keep going. And then any terrain that comes off the table, whoever forced the scroll, the other player can just replace it somewhere else. Within 12 inches of anybody or anything like that. So you can't just slap a shoal right in front of somebody's ship suddenly. But we recommend 4 foot by 4 foot for a naval battle, which works really well. A lot of people play a little bigger, 6x4. You don't really need the space. You're just going to scroll less often, which even on a 4x4, we almost never do, really, when we play anyway. So it's a game designed to have a small footprint. You don't need a ton of terrain. You don't need a big space. You don't need a gigantic model collection. A lot of people, a really popular format is a lot of people, because we started doing tournaments, and we did tournaments at 100-point ground battles, right? So we play those on a 3 foot by 3 foot table, and those are typically between 15 on the really small end and like 25 on the large end model count. And they go really quick. Games play at that point size. Games play typically in less than an hour. We've been able to do 3-round tournaments in a single convention session, and play the whole way through. And everybody finishes the games. We often end early, so it makes it so being able to get more games in is always good. Yeah, without losing the kind of epic feel of the battle. So the game's not too quick. It's not too simple, but I think it's in a really good place.
If someone like me who loves big games wants to play a big game of Blood and Plunder, big game, you know what I mean? Can he do it? Are the rules can accommodate a huge game?
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, we released, because we started running big games at conventions, right? Every time we go to a convention, we typically run a really big game. And the good thing is that even bigger games, they really go by pretty fast. We've played with, we've played like, I think up to 2,000 points, probably more with ship battles. We don't really calculate points for those. We just kind of put historical-ish forces together. But I know that they're upwards of 2,000 points, especially with the ships involved. We have one of our bigger models is we have a galleon, and it's a 28-gun galleon, and it's about 2 feet long. And that thing alone, just all the guns you're going to buy for it and the crew, that thing alone is like almost 1,000 points. So, so definitely we've been upwards of 2,000. But as we started developing the way to do that, going to shows and doing that, when we released our first expansion, which is the No Peace Beyond the Line, which is the one that has the massive amount of factions in it, we released army scale battle rules. So instead of so when you play, and what the gist of it is that when you play your initiative card, instead of activating a single unit, you activate a company. So every unit within that company still activates on its own, but they all activate at the same time, and they play off of that card. So now that lets you keep the exact same mechanics, but scale it up massively and still play
faster.
Really quickly.
It's faster like this.
Yeah. And so we've played convention games, like I said, with like 300 models on the table, if not more, and 12 players. And we typically have played those on a 6x4 on land, or if it's sea, we go a lot bigger. We do which I guess is a 12x6. I'm sorry, no, 8x6.
Sure.
Yeah, 8x6. We do an 8x6 for a big sea battle. But for land games, we've actually been doing 6x4s, and we've recently changed that to 6x3, which is plenty. The 6x3 with the 6x4s is a lot more dead turns where you're just kind of moving, not really doing anything, just getting in position. With the 6x3s, we've kind of eliminated that. You just have kind of one turn of setting up, and then you're right into the battle, which is really good, especially for a convention game where you don't want people sitting there just maneuvering around for ages and not getting into the action. So, but that's what, and those have been, again, same size, 12 players, 2,000 point, like hundreds of models, and they've played really well. We've done a bunch of historical battles doing those. Like we've done the attack on St. Augustine, which is a famous one here in by 4 Floridians, because it's what we have a Spanish fortress that was built here in St. Augustine as a result of this attack. So we've done that. We've done some when the Spanish counter raid on the Spanish and French attack Charleston, South Carolina, or near Charleston. They're basically expelling the Scottish settlers that had settled there. And we've done quite a few battles like that. We've done a couple in the Caribbean, like one where a Spanish privateer is seeking revenge and he attacks a French buccaneer port to his detriment, and a bunch of stuff. We've done some Henry Morgan stuff. It's always really fun to do historical battles and kind of relive it.
You're giving me a good assist now to ask you another question. Many wargamer friends of mine and people who have chat in the channel are looking for campaigns. They really enjoy campaigns. They really enjoy battles that have consequences. They really enjoy a battle that will have consequences in the next one. It's many gamers are looking for these campaigns. I don't think there are many in the wargaming community, but from my experience the last years and actually my needs as well, I can see that people would enjoy having a campaign rulebook of the game they like. Is it something you're doing? Is it something you're thinking of doing? A campaign booklet for how brilliant it would be for Blood Plunder to have a campaign in the Caribbean or something? Is it something you're thinking? I'm just came because I know that many gamers are looking for games that have consequences. They're more strategic, more interesting, more exciting. If you screw up in a game, you know that you're going to be in trouble in the next battle. Something like this. Something you thought of?
It's yes. In fact, we already have it. So in that same book where we have all the armies, all the new armies, and where we have the army battle rules, we also have the campaign rules, and those were written by those were not written by me. Those were written by Nate Zettel, who's a contributor of ours, and he is so he made a system. I chatted with him, kind of what I was thinking. One of the challenges with campaigns, for me personally, from my experience, is that everybody's always excited to start the campaign, but once it's up and running and you've gotten past the first game or two, it tends to get tedious and you get a lot of dropout, right? So we wanted to do something that kept that feel of a campaign, like those consequences, those important aspects of a campaign, and just kind of make it simpler. But so what we did was, again, we turned to the history, right? A lot of the famous people from our period in our era, especially people coming from Europe to the New World, are coming to make a name for themselves. They're coming to establish themselves. They want to seek their fortunes. They want to, move up in power and gain notoriety so they can go back to Europe and move up the social ladder, what have you, right? All those types of things. So we made that the motivation for the campaign. So it's the campaign system revolves around a player building up their character, right? In a sort of an RPG aspect, I guess you could say. So you start with a basic force you start with some basic force options, but the only thing you have to track is your commander's notoriety, experience, and influence, those types of things. So it's very, very easy to track everything. There's not a lot of bookkeeping involved in the campaign. But as your commander grows in experience and as he grows in notoriety and fame and whatever, right, it's gonna be easier for him to get more resources. So now when you set up to play your game, your commander model will be on the table and he'll get all the special things that he's gained as he grows. But when you first start out, right, like maybe the best thing you can get is a piragua for you, which is like basically a very large canoe for your fleet. To if you want to go, let's say you're running a pirate character, right? Because that's always the most popular, is the pirate character.
Yeah, of course.
So so let's say you're running a pirate character, you want to start out as a pirate. So now that's probably the best you can muster up is getting a piragua, right? But now you've got a few successful raids under your belt. You're doing well. You've moved up in the world. Now you're able to get your hands on like a light frigate, let's say. So now you've got a much more powerful option available to you. And these are not things you have to keep track of necessarily. They're just options that become available to you as you start playing the game. And this is reflective of the historical reality, right? So you can look at somebody like a really famous person like Henry Morgan. So Henry Morgan, when he is a buccaneer out of Jamaica, he comes as a nobody. He's, under Christopher Mings initially, but slowly builds up his reputation as a solid commander, eventually gets his own commission, is able to get a crew together, goes out, participates in raids again under Ming's, but now in a command position. Now, next thing you know, he's putting together his own raids. Now he's getting to the point where he's considered admiral of the Buccaneers. So to the point where even the British Crown gives him a warship to use in his expeditions, right? And as he does this, I mean, by the time he gets to the point where he's at Panama, when the word comes out that Henry Morgan is going for a raid, every Buccaneer in the Caribbean shows up at Ile Vache, right, which is their like staging area. So, and that's the theme of the sort of campaign. So as you build and as you grow, you basically gain all these resources where the Crown is giving you warships. You know, every Buccaneer in the Caribbean's coming out. You can put together a massive army. Nobody's going to want to fight against you. It's just you're just growing in popularity. You're probably going to end up winning the campaign. So basically, you play a certain number of games, and whoever comes out the most rich, famous, and powerful is the winner of the campaign.
Oh, that's very good. It's like an RPG, as you said, but very good idea. Very unique.
Yes. Yeah. So and then we want to do different types of campaigns as well. I know players love maps and they love map campaigns where there's territory things moving around. It wasn't really fitting for our previous setting. There wasn't a whole lot of conquest happening between European factions for the most part. Most of it was political. But now that because one of the ways we're moving the game forward, I think you talked about. So this is answering a previous question I think I missed. We are obviously going to be adding lots of things as we go. So our plan to move the game forward is to actually move the timeline forward, similar to what again the similar thing that they would do in a fantasy or science fiction game, right? Is that now this is the new part of the story. So the game was exclusively 17th century previously. We just did a big Kickstarter where we launched the 18th century. We're doing as well as a new line of hard plastic models, a hard plastic ship, a bunch of new stuff like that. So now the new book will take. So we'll move the game into the 18th century, which is going to add a whole bunch of new factions, new commanders, new characters, new ships, new options, new technologies, new military doctrines, a lot of new things that come about. So that is going to add. So basically, every single faction that existed previously now gets new options, and they basically get an updated format of that faction. And then there's new factions that come around, like you get the actual armies from Europe that are disciplined and drilled in new ways, showing up in the New World, fighting in it, because you have the Queen Anne's War, right, which is the War of Spanish Succession in Europe. But in colonies, it's Queen Anne's War, right? So that's the first real big. Before they have King William's War, which is kind of the predecessor to it, which was the War of Austrians. I mean, not the war, the War of the League of Augsburg. So so you get that conflict, right? Which is pretty substantial in the New World, but nothing really happens as a result of it, right? There's a few little things change hands, but nothing much. When you have Queen Anne's War now, that's the first real big French and Indian War, where you have some pretty massive conflicts going on. Some things do change hands, things, and Europe is now fully invested. They've sent troops, they're sending fleets, they're putting resources into it instead of just the colonies fighting among themselves with maybe a sprinkling of European support. Now Europe's fully invested in the conflict. So as a result, we start to see what a lot of people call the wars for empire, right? Where now France and England primarily, although the Spanish and the Dutch like to pretend that they have a chance, so they participate as well. But they start participating in this war for or in this long term that ends in the final French and Indian War in the 1750s, right? In the 60s, with who's going to dominate, who's going to have the greatest world empire. So now that sets the stage for that kind of a map campaign. So it's something that we're thinking about looking at. We have there's a player. We have a player who's a big fan of the game who submitted a really, really good one. I'm passing around the team now, looking at it, see if we can and that's kind of the more crunchy sort of map-based campaign that I think a lot of people are looking for. So that could be a new option that we go in the direction of.
Well, that's very interesting. Yes. We're talking an hour. It passed very quickly. I'm really enjoying myself because all these I'm hearing, it's totally new for me, 100 Years War is my only interest. I asked you before this, but what are you where do you want to take the company in the future now? I mean, what is your plans? I know we talked about games and we talked about future games and games you're doing, but how would you like to see the company in a few years' time? I'm thinking of manufacturing more miniatures or having more. I'm just asking as a young entrepreneur, and what would be the aim of Firelock in the future?
So for me, I would what I would like to do is put out as many games as possible. Just because I just love getting into new games. I love as a game. Once I've started designing games, now it's kind of open. Like I really enjoy it. I really like seeing what other people do and come up with, especially with the system that we've created, and seeing people get that and alter it and do different things with it. Like when Rufus Devane, who did Blood and Valor, when he got the Blood and Plunder system and tweaked it and changed it and made it work for the First World War, it doesn't feel. It feels like a First World War game. It doesn't feel like a 17th century skirmish. It's really cool what he did with that to see that happen. So I would like to see a lot more of that happen. Now, as far as our actual plans, of course, like I talked about, we do want to release all these rule sets where people are doing that, and that's a pretty easy project for us for the most part, since we're mostly just doing the design layout of the book and then the printing. And we, as much as I would like to be more involved in the design of those books, there's not enough time in the day. But I will play them and read them and give feedback, as I'm essentially on a playtester's role. But so those are things that I think you'll see continuing to trickle out from us. As there probably would have been one out early next year had not been for the whole pandemic making a big mess of things.
Yeah,
stopping all playtesting for the most part. So so that was so that slowed us down a little bit. But we plan on going forward. We want to expand Blood and Plunder, Oak and Iron. Those are of course our focuses. Those two games, and Oak and Iron came out as a result of Blood and Plunder because they kind of go hand in hand together. So as we move the timeline forward for Blood and Plunder, it'll catch up with where Oak and Iron is now. Because Oak and Iron basically cuts off at 1750, and from there, I'm one of the things I'm most excited about is taking Blood and Plunder into the late 18th century, where we're covering the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and a bunch of things like that, where it really becomes a real big world conflict, the French and Indian War and things of that nature. So when we're pushing into that, the Oak and Iron will move along with it, right? Since we're going to be most of the things we're going to design in the future are going to be now. So we make our own metal and resin miniatures here in in our warehouse. But we're moving more now toward more plastics and hard plastics, things like that. We're going to continue with our metal, to fill in the range in certain places and stuff like that. But the core of our releases in the future will definitely be in the plastics. So that's something that's going to allow us to grow and to do more things as we go forward. So more game systems that come from there. Moving Blood and Plunder forward, those are some of the big things. We also have some kind of out of the box ideas, I think, a little bit. So one of the things like we're releasing, it's looking like next year, is a role playing game for that's basically Blood and Plunder. It's a Blood and Plunder role playing game essentially, right? So and it's a fully historical game, right? So I think there's a lot. Role playing has become very popular these days. I've never been a person who has played it a lot. It just doesn't go toward my interest. But I could see myself trying out a historical role playing game and getting a little more into that. I've participated in this. We talked about the St. Augustine battle, so they do a reenactment of that every year here in Florida, and I participated in that, and I thought that was a lot of fun. I could see myself kind of moving in that direction. So as a person who's interested in history, I could see that being something that other people, especially younger people, again, people who are maybe have an interest in history, but maybe are kind of put off by some of the what they perceive as the stuffiness of some historical wargaming, which I would disagree with for the most part, but I can understand the perception. And I think that's just another channel which we can use to outreach and to get more people interested in historical gaming in general. So stuff like that, board strategic and tactical board games and things of that nature. I know there's my business partner Alex, who loves hex and shit style war games. He's been dying to make a kind of Blood and Plunder port over to like a hex and shit style, more mass battle kind of a game. So there's a few things like that we're looking at to the future, but we're we kind of take things a day at a time, and we follow where the inspiration leads, right? So I don't know what could happen tomorrow, but that's one of the fun things about having a small company, is we can kind of be mobile and flexible and just kind of do whatever we want to do.
Mike, one last question, and I will leave you. We have a whole day in front of you, I'm sure.
Sure.
I want to ask you a question, just quick answer. I have many people who are watching now, or watching the video. What, as a successful game designer, what advice would you give to someone who wants to make his own rule set? He wants to try something different. He's not happy with what's around, and he wants to try it. Could you give advice? Nothing major, just an advice how he can work around this. So what would you recommend as a successful game designer?
Right. Well, first I would say don't be intimidated, right? Just give it a shot. Start with whatever you think works. What started out for me as Blood and Plunder ended up being completely different, because I had no idea what I was doing, right? I just kind of copied ideas from what I had already experienced, put them together into like a hodgepodge of a system. It didn't work very well, but immediately I started to see why it didn't work. And then those types of things, just, from there you'll grow and get ideas and find what works and what doesn't. And Blood and Plunder took me, 2 years more or less, kind of on and off. I wasn't really working on it a lot, but going to school and stuff, it was very back burner for me, until we decided to start Firelock Games, in which case it became, obviously, once we got to that point, it took about a year to just wrap it up and put it together. But to go a little more directly into your question, don't get overwhelmed with one of the things that happens to me is I'll find this little historical detail that I think is so cool and fascinating, and sometimes I'll get hung up on it, and I will twist things and move things around to make it work when it's really just not going to add a lot to the game at the end of the day. So try to identify those things. Those things could be the things that really hang up your game and make it not fun. You're going to if you have to change a bunch of rules to make one little detail work that at the end of the day is maybe cool, or interesting, or you may even think is important, but if it doesn't have a big impact on the overall tactical approach you're trying to take, then don't be afraid to change it, get rid of it, find a more interesting way to do it, abstract it, build it into something else. One of the things I always try to do is try to keep the same numbers, the same types of mechanics repeated across different types of things, so that you don't have to learn a different mechanic for each thing. It should all be as samey as possible, is what we always say here. And just don't be afraid to steal ideas, because everybody does it. We all steal from each other. And typically when you steal an idea, it's going to end up, as you play it and as you integrate it into your system, as long as you're not stealing an entire game system, it's going to typically change as you play it and as you think about it, and it's going to turn into a whole new idea. So like the card initiative that we have in Blood and Plunder actually came from started its life as a similar mechanic to a game called AT-43 back in the day, where you basically had to pre-assign the order in which you activated units, and you did that by cards. So you'd have to start with this card and go to the next. So that's where it started. It's completely different from that now. So because again, I just took from what they did, because I enjoyed that aspect. I enjoyed having a pre-plan and having to deal with what I'm dealt that I chose. But I like the idea of being able to choose that myself. So it's all those kinds of ideas came from that system that somebody else came up with, and then I just evolved it into my own thing. So I think that's what ends up making games interesting and unique, when you as a designer can get into those types of things and then just adapt it and change it. And then similar things like the Star Wars Legion, which is a game I think is pretty cool. They have they kind of got a hybrid of our system and the bolt action system mixed together, which is pretty interesting. So they have a card activation mechanic, but it's for your whole army. And then their actions, instead of giving your units actions, they give you you get to pick tokens from your bag to have face up on certain troops, right? So again, slower initiative cards, you can have more troops ready to go whenever you want. Faster initiative cards, maybe just one, right? And then the rest you got to pull from the bag. So it's kind of a cool mix of mechanics there. So things like that are just always what make gaming evolve and interesting, and it's going to continue to improve games as the future progresses. I'm excited to see where new developers come in and start changing things and creating new ideas I can steal from.
Mike, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It was very interesting. I really learned a lot. Thank you so much. I hope when you have something new, now we're friends also, you contact me so we can have another chat with the new additions of your games. I would be very happy for you to come and chat to us about it. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for joining me.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the chat. I think Mike, again, is a brilliant conversation. I learned too much today. You know, I'm a boring 100 years war gamer, and today I learned too much. And this rule set, this game, Blood Plunder, looks very, very interesting, and I'm sure gonna look for it again. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Bye-bye. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks. Take care.